This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, the Cloud and AI Development Act. My name is Joyce O'Connor and I chair the digital group here at the IIEA. And I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's discussion on the Cloud and AI Development Act and what it would mean for Europe and indeed Ireland's digital future. We're really very pleased to welcome our keynote speaker today, Manuel Mateo, Head of the Cloud and Software Unit in DG Connect in the European Commission. Manuel, you're very welcome. And I know you've had a particularly busy week, so thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it very much. Manuel would speak to us for about 20 to 25 minutes. And following his keynote address, we will have a moderated discussion and Q&A. Today, we will finish our discussion at about 10 to 2. Please feel free to send in your comments or questions throughout his presentation. I'd very much appreciate if you would give your name and affiliation when you're asking a question. Thanks very much for that. Today's presentation, as usual, and the Q&A are on the record. Join us also, if you can, on X using the handle at IIEA. Artificial intelligence, as we know, is rapidly transforming every sector of our economy and society, from healthcare and financial services to manufacturing, education, and public administration. AI, as we know, presents enormous opportunities for innovation, productivity, and economic growth. However, realizing the opportunities depends on something that is often less visible, but absolutely fundamental: the digital infrastructure that powers AI. Cloud computing, high-performance computing, secure data infrastructure, and access to scalable digital capacity are now strategic assets. So as Europe seeks to strengthen its competitiveness, technological sovereignty, and resilience, the policy choices we make today will shape our ability to innovate, attract investment, support business, and develop trusted AI solutions for decades to come. Today's presentation with Manuel comes at a pivotal moment. As the EU advances its ambitions to become a global leader in trustworthy AI, it must also ensure that the underlying cloud infrastructure, data ecosystem, and investment environment can support this ambition. The proposed Cloud and AI Development Act is therefore much more than a technical legislative initiative. It's part of a broader mission for Europe's digital economy, competitiveness, and strategic economy. So we're particularly delighted to invite our keynote speaker today, Manuel Mateo. Manuel, as we said, is head of the Cloud and Software Unit in the DG Connect in the European Commission. And as you see from his bio, Manuel has extensive experience at the intersection of European digital policy, cloud technologies, and artificial intelligence. His work provides valuable insights into how Europe can create the right regulatory and investment framework to accelerate AI innovation while maintaining the values of trust, security, and openness that underpin the European project. Manuel will present us with an overview of the proposed Cloud and AI Development Act, the opportunities it presents, and the challenges that remain. It's now my great pleasure to ask Manuel to make his keynote address. Over to you, Manuel.
Joyce, good afternoon, and good afternoon to everyone online. Thank you for the great introduction. A word that I'll pick from your kind words is this idea that this is not only about a regulatory framework for the uptake of cloud and AI, but it is as well about investment. And let's hope, definitely our ambition is that this is a very much pro-business and pro-investment vision that we have for Europe. The Cloud and AI Development Act was adopted just 2 weeks ago, almost by the minute. It is made of a broader, it is a subpart of a broader package on the so-called tech sovereignty package. It is one of the 4 documents you can read there. From a regulatory point of view, the CHIPS Act is complementing this, obviously, for the CHIPS part. There's a very important open source strategy and digitalization of the AI sector, which are worth your attention to. I'll focus naturally on the Cloud and AI Development Act, but the overall communication is about technological sovereignty. This is a concept that is there defined, and I've here extracted the main lines, but in essence, it is about making sure that Europe is growingly autonomous and is capable of controlling its own fate. It is not about cutting ties. It is not about pretending that this value chain of AI is can be captive to anyone. It is an area of vast and deep interdependencies across the world. Yet, in the current situation, there are steps or chains in this value chain, chain links in this value chain that require to be where Europe cannot afford to not have a minimum level of autonomy. The good news, if you want, is that even though we've not fared as well as other regions when it gets to developing our own hyperscalers, to develop our own frontier AI models, we see that the next race is the race of adoption of AI. And today's figures are quite encouraging. Europe is today on equal terms to the US in terms of AI adoption and ahead of China, despite what some headlines here and there can lead to believe. Meaning that that race can be won and some significant socioeconomic benefit can be drawn from that. Another of those objectives is that we're not starting from nowhere. We have very strong supply chains in Europe. On some segments of this value chain, we are even the world leaders. I'm thinking, of course, to companies like ASML, but as well companies like Eaton or Schneider Electric. And then there's this vision that tech can be thought and designed differently. 2 problem statements that we want to deal with in this legislative act. So I'm now really diving into the Cloud and AI Development Act. It's first the lack of capacity, and I know that for an Irish-centered audience, this might sound a bit might sound unreal or unrealistic, but more about that in a moment. And then this question of autonomy on services. I'm here with my colleague Beatrice Bozao. She will walk us through the next slides and a few figures.
Thank you, Manuel. Sorry, can you hear me properly? I hope so. Yes, so as Manuel was pointing out, the first problem that you see here in the form of a chart is about our lack of capacity altogether as a union. And on the red line, you can see the supply of data center capacity. Now we have estimated to be around 12 gigawatts for this capacity and arriving up to 42 in 10 years' time. but the demand that you can see with the blue line is actually higher than this infrastructure and this data center capacity, pointing to a current and an ever-increasing gap. And that's why we think CADA can intervene here, precisely as you can see in this green line, to close this gap with a series of targeted measures that Manuel will then present more in detail. And looking at this problem from a different perspective, as Manuel was pointing out, it's not just a problem of capacity, but it's also a problem of geographical concentration of this capacity. And as he was saying, I think you are all well aware of this let's say problem, of this issue, and the chart might not be too surprising for you to see. Of course, Ireland on the left as a country with a huge amount of capacity, especially when we look at it through the lens of capacity per capita. Here the chart is showing per 100,000 people, with an average figure of 2.43 megawatt per capita, so quite different and distant from Ireland, and other countries, of course, lagging behind this skewed distribution. And then, this is, of course, you may be well aware, due to several of, path dependencies linked to the availability of connectivity in Ireland, linked to the availability of energy, to easy permitting in the member states you see on the left. But it's important also to harmonize these conditions so that the geographical distribution of this capacity is also, a relevant element for the whole of Union. And if we go to the next slide, or maybe a word of
just a remark on this one. You will see down the road measures to accelerate the deployment of data centers, which again might sound unreal to an Irish audience. If you look back at this slide, this 60 gigawatt of installed capacity in Europe in 10 years from now would equate on a per capita based to about 14 gigawatts per 100,000 inhabitants. So you see that on average, of course, but so you see that Ireland is today the only country in Europe to already not only be above, but well above this. So we will lay down all those ideas to accelerate deployment of capacity, but there's a clear situation in Ireland where, of course, Ireland can decide to move from 30 to more. That's for Ireland to decide. But that it's not an obligation that will come from anywhere in this regulation to do even more. Back to you, Beth.
Okay, so now shifting to the second problem Manuel was mentioning before. If the first problem was about infrastructure, the second one is about services, and this you might all be also aware of given the latest headlines. On the left side of the slide, you can see the European cloud market in blue has been growing double digits in the last years, but the European cloud provider shares have been shrinking and steadily sit at 15% from an old 30% in the past few years, which means that Europe is one of the largest markets globally, but European providers are not able to capture these benefits or reap the benefits of this increasing market. And you see the same, let's say, picture, but in a table format on the right side of the slide, seeing who are the top 5 providers of the European market. And then maybe, so how does CADA solve, or tries at least to solve, the challenges, the problems, the issues that we have just prepared? It does so trying through 3 key pillars. The first one is about, on the left side, R&D&I, research, development, and innovation, a vision for the next 10 years of research programs in the area of cloud and AI. The second pillar is about capacity. It's about how can we deploy this capacity in the most sustainable, innovative way and harmonize the conditions for Europe to deploy such capacity in also a more distributed way across member states. And then the third one, making most of the headlines, we have to say, in the past few days and since adoption, is the part on autonomy. So the need to create let's say, regain part of our technological sovereignty and competitiveness in this field with a series of provision linked to this part of autonomy and adoption of cloud and AI. So maybe now we will quickly delve into these pillars, and so that you can also have a better picture of what I was just mentioning at a higher level. So the pillar one, as I was saying, is about research, development, and innovation, and it presents the cloud and AI leadership initiatives, which are these research initiatives. And here you can see their general objectives, which span from the development of cutting-edge cloud and AI technologies to reinforcing our data center and cloud capacity, so the infrastructure element, but also finally stimulating the demand and the uptake of these technologies, both across the public and the private sector. These general objectives are then declined into more operational objectives, which once again span the whole value chain of the cloud and AI ecosystem, from advanced data center technology. So how can we develop and scale the most energy efficient, resource efficient technologies, up to industrial AI platforms, AI systems, and adoption. The second slide will show you how we plan to do it. We plan to do it through grant challenges, cross-border, cross-sectorial challenges that aim to solve some of these most pressing industrial and technological challenges related to cloud and AI that was mentioned before, and are a way to implement these operational objectives by the Commission, by the Member States, and eventually also joint undertakings. And of course, in synergy with what Manu has presented before, other initiatives such as the CHIPS Act. An important element of this pillar also concerns national cloud and AI strategies, because we feel that member states certainly all have an AI strategy, may have some cloud strategies, data center strategies, but then we are asking them to deploy a vision for this development of cloud and AI from the data centers to the actual adoption of AI, and at the end of the services in terms of the value chain. This pillar also has some few articles on the bottom. You can see on priority AI, frontier AI projects, and the sufficient compute to support such projects. And then finally on the bubble you see there, we have some provisions on this implementation of this pillar through experience and acceleration centers for AI, which are a kind of evolution from the European Digital Innovation Hubs to support the adoption. So one of the last operational objectives that represents the adoption, the acceleration of AI, especially for the scale-ups, the SMEs, and the public sector as a whole. Then moving on to the second pillar that I was presenting to you. So we just discussed the research part. The second pillar is about infrastructure, and it's about the harmonization of the deployment of data center across the EU. And we introduced the data center acceleration zones, which are areas within a country's territory that member states shall designate, let's say, after having assessed a series of criteria that you see here on the screen, to facilitate the work of providers in identifying the suitable sites, but also granting that they are the most adequate location with sustainability in mind, with the possibility of reusing the brownfield over greenfield site, and with a series of conditions to deploy the capacity in the most effective and sustainable way. Across the data center development journey, we are also asking member states to have a single information point that can accompany the project, the investors, to understand the different elements of the permitting procedures, and prepare a baseline aggregated permit to go from data center application to effective deployment. And within the zones, also member states shall try to ensure a fair allocation of resources to prevent any type of hoarding or preemption of capacity by single players. Another very important element of Pillar 2 that we have introduced are the strategic data center projects. Why? Because not all data centers are born equal, if we want, meaning that there are some projects that deserve particular attention because they, for example, contribute to the local economy or serve or support essential public sector functions. And thus, the Commission will be designating such projects based on open calls, meeting at least 2 of the conditions that you see here on the screen. And in turn, these projects will have benefits linked to access to union programs and through the European Competitiveness Fund and a facilitated national state aid scheme.
Maybe a pause before we move to Pillar 3, or a quick compliment. The fundamental aspect of Pillar 2, and this was a design choice by us, is that those are acceleration measures that we're kind of harmonizing at European level, but where the enforcement and the decision making is down to member states. So this is not about Brussels deciding what new data center should be deployed where. It's just us telling member states, think about the gap we presented today earlier, do your share of the effort, but then the responsibility of deciding size, etc., is down to you. There's no measures here that that are contrary to whatever local decision making is happening in any member state. I think this aspect of strategic data centers is very relevant because, again, in the spirit that member states are free to do whatever they want, they can decide to accelerate this deployment, and you've seen the graphs of some countries really lagging behind. But I can imagine that in countries such as, but not limited to Ireland, where deployment is already very consequential, you decide to be more picky as to which type of data centers you decide to implement on your territory. And this framework of strategic data centers offers that possibility for you. Let me now move away quickly away from the data center the data center part and look into the services part. The services part. What the Cloud and AI Development Act is putting forward is a sovereignty framework. The reason being, and I take a parenthesis before explaining this here, is that throughout Europe, our adoption is not what it should be. The businesses are, broadly speaking, at 48% of adoption of cloud and AI services. The public sector way less. And so one of the things we're trying to tackle here is the lack of trust that customers have, and in particular, the public sector. And when you speak to the public sector why they're not picking up cloud services sufficiently, lack of trust, lack of knowledge of where their data go, risk of seeing their operations being in the hands of someone else surface quite a bit. And it's precisely those fears that we're trying to assess. In response to those fears, the business, the CSPs, the cloud service providers, have been developing a plethora of so-called sovereign cloud services with very different definitions, and they've actually had a counter effect. Instead of simplifying and making the life of buyers easier, they made it more complicated because they're suddenly flooded with endless amounts of commercial proposals promising to be more sovereign than another. And so the idea put forward here is to have a common reference framework against which to assess the sovereignty of cloud and AI solutions, having in mind the public sector. So this is almost not relevant for the private sector, but thinking about the public sector as the end client. Let me bring your attention to a few boxes. So four levels with increasing demands, 8 criteria. Let me walk you through some of the most relevant aspects. The blue box is about forbidding from the public sector some cloud suppliers whose main country, so whose headquarters force them to not disclose their vulnerabilities, but only to their headquarters countries administration, something we don't want, and something where, as it stands right now, China has such a law. So this is the practical effect of the blue box. Then the practical effect of the pink box is that the capacity should be fully located. The infrastructure supporting the cloud and AI service should be fully located in the Union. And then a question of who controls the company. Level 1 assumes that the company is established in the EU. Established means to have proper operations, so not just a letterbox. So if you read level 1 horizontally now, you see that the amount of requirements is altogether fairly low. You as well can easily deduce that American CSPs easily comply today with existing commercial offers. You as well can, I'll come back to it in a second as the reasons why, but as well, you will see that level 3 and 4 are situations that to the moment, right now, almost don't exist because those are public sector use cases that are pretty much dealt on premises and not on the cloud. Level 2 requires so I'm now in the green box at level 2, requires the establishment and so still the establishment, but as well a demonstration that the supplier is not subject to interference from third countries when it gets to access to data or where it gets to the throttling or the cutting of services. And level 3 and 4 have got this idea of a EU establishment as well, but as well owned and controlled. So this is European headquartered companies, and I'll come back to this red asterisk in a moment. Now, the real difference in between level 3 and 4 is the difference in the level of control that people have over the software, so an high degree versus an effective control. The asterisk for level 3 implies the possibility for the Union to recognize a third country and therefore for the supplies of such third country to be able to be recognized as level 3. And you see the criteria on the screen. I can come back to them if you're interested. The way for those levels to be recognized is always in the hands of member states. With the country of establishment leading the recognition, but it's a common recognition by all member states. So this is the spirit of the single market that is preserved here. And because level 1 is fairly simple, is on the basis on the simple conformity self-assessment that member states would then look into, and we've even made it easier for SMEs. But for levels 2 and 3 and 4, where the criteria become more demanding and which on top are geared towards the protection of public order, where the evidence provided by the suppliers should be substantiated with a third-party audit. This is not to be done in a secret. There will be a public repository of those recognized levels. How to implement this in practice? It will be for public authorities to decide for their own needs through a risk assessment which one of their IT services need to be covered by which service. The Commission will help in providing a methodology and in verifying those assessments to ensure a minimum harmonization among member states. And then logically, member states will follow up and proceed to procure those services. A drastically different regime for the private sector, where it's not an obligation anymore, but a suggestion, only for a limited number of public sectors to conduct their risk assessments as part of what they already conduct in terms of assessment. So it's a complement to their existing risk assessment. This is the sovereignty. We're as well a part on resilience, which I will really skim quickly. There's an EU added value criteria that member states shall use when they buy innovative cloud and AI services. So this is not an EU preference as such, but it's rewarding the value creation within the Union across the 4 criteria you see here on screen. We want member states to do more for SMEs and innovative procurement, with an objective to reach 25% of procurement to innovative SMEs. I skip this because this is government to government. Joint procurement, we want for member states and contracting authorities that do not have the technical know-how. We want to be able to conduct joint tenders at European level that could then be used by them. And then there's finally the adoption of some encouragement to adopt and simplification to adopt open source in the public sector. So this is the quick walkthrough of the initiative, and of course we're now very pleased, Bea and myself, to take any question that you might have.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.